Hey y'all, welcome to SLP Full Disclosure. I'm your host, Michelle, and today we have a very special guest with us. Not only is she a dear, dear friend of mine from many, many moons ago, but she is an excellent in her profession. And I'm super excited to have her here today and get lots of knowledge from her. Joining us today, we have Dr. Shannon Hill, and I'm just going to have to read this bio because she has extensive experience in this field. Dr. Hill is a licensed behavior analyst and licensed professional counselor. She entered the field of developmental disability services as a direct care professional and went on to work as a vocational educator before moving into behavioral supports. She has worked extensively in residential programs, providing services to adults and children with intellectual disabilities, autism, Prader-Willi syndrome, and a wide range of low-incidence developmental disabilities. She has more than a decade of experience as a consultant working in public school settings, and she has served as an adjunct professor in several university programs. Shannon is passionate about seeing behavior analysis services extended beyond autism. So Shannon, Dr. Hill, thank you so much for joining us today. So we have lots and lots of things to talk about. First, I want to let our listeners, I want to hear your side of the story about how we met, which has been 30 plus years ago. I was counting it up this morning. Yeah.
How much detail am I allowed to give about that, Michelle?
Not too many details. We'll give the nice version.
So Michelle and I were both working in a residential facility for adults with intellectual disabilities. And I know that you've talked about that previously because I've listened to all your episodes.
Thank you very much.
So yeah, and we had both, I thought when I came that I was going to do like a summer job. I don't know if that's what you thought, but I thought I was coming to just get some money to pay my rent for the summer while I was taking I may have been taking a summer school class. I don't know, but we were both undergraduates. I was actually an English undergraduate at that time.
I remember that.
I was going to go off and go to grad school and be a writer someday. But we both just had our lives changed from that little what was supposed to be for me 3 or 4 month experience that turned into 30 years.
Yes. And Shannon, you and I have had lots of deep, detailed conversations about that and our work there. Before we get into it, and I think I had this geared toward asking you toward the end, but what we're going to be talking about today is SLPs and BCBAs and the collaborative effort that we, in working with children and adults of all ages. So we're going to not only talk about kids, which is primarily my specialty right now, but you work with a wide variety of ages. So I want to kind of touch on everything, but how has behavior management changed since you and I worked together 30 plus years ago?
Oh my God. I am so happy to say it's just night and day what it was back then. And to the point that we don't really even consider it behavior management anymore. There's been such a pivot in the philosophy of how you intervene that so when we talk about behavior analysis, the difference being with behavior management, the idea was you're focusing a lot on problem behavior.
Right.
And how you're going to control it, how you're going to stop it. But with behavior analysis, you are looking at all of the events surrounding it, which, we kind of did that with behavior management, but it just wasn't as sophisticated yet. Mm-hmm. So the assessments now are focused on the idea that this problem behavior is filling a need that we need to understand what that need is. So is it a skill deficit? Is it that the person doesn't have the ability to communicate what it is that they need? Is it that they are in an environment that is too taxing on the resources that they have? Is it that they have limited control over their life and they have learned that this one behavior will get control turned over immediately and get all of their needs met at one time? Yeah. So there's so much more emphasis now on building those skills, not just trying to contain a behavior or stop or get people to obey or comply.
Mm-hmm.
We did a lot of things back in the day that actually led to what is called prompt reliance,
Mm-hmm.
where basically we were oftentimes teaching people to sit and wait on someone to tell you when it's time to do this or time to do that. And some of that is just life in congregate care. It runs more smoothly for the
Mm-hmm.
staff and for everyone if people are waiting and following directions. But in reality, to have a full quality life where you don't need to quote unquote act up as much, you need to have some control over your life. You need to be
Right.
able to know when it's time to get up and wash your hands for dinner without someone telling you. I
Right.
mean, do you remember being a teenager, Michelle? Was this true for you? When I was a teenager, just if I was on my way to wash my hands and my mother had said, "Go wash your hands," I would have not
You would
washed my
stop.
hands.
You would stop. You wouldn't do it.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. And
Only,
so
and the only reason is because you were told to do it.
because I was just told to do it, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew people who were like that they did not want to be told what to do. And we knew people who would sit and wait until you told them to do what to do, and even though they knew exactly what they were supposed to do.
Right.
So many things like that I think applied behavior analysis has done a good job in bringing forward and focusing on building those kinds of skills instead of just managing inappropriate
Right.
behaviors.
And I think you said something a minute ago that was really poignant. You said it's much more sophisticated now. And it
Yeah.
is, because back in the day, and I say back in the day, I think even now, working in a school setting, when we have these little bitties that come in and they've got these behaviors, but now I know one of the things that you said that you were interested in is applied behavioral analysis outside of autism. So we're not talking about, typically when people hear ABA or you've
Mhm.
got a BCBA involved, it's because of that child has autism. But working with these kids who have other mental health issues, are we seeing more mental health issues in general, or what is the cause of that? That's because I've got kids that I've worked with in the past that are 3, 4, 5 years old who have these massive behaviors and they don't have a diagnosis of autism. What is causing the mental health issues in these little bitty kids?
It's probably a big question for me to answer definitively. I can throw out some thoughts and what is being looked at with that. Number one, we recognize, diagnose, and keep kids in schools more than we used to. And so I do think that there's some bit of just idea, the law, the
Mm-hmm.
education
Yeah,
law idea has really done a lot to ensure that kids who do have problems aren't kicked out of school
right.
and that they are kept in there, and not just not kicked out, but they're not separated. You know,
Mm-hmm.
when I was in school, public school, special education was
And
in
me. Yeah,
the portable buildings in the back. We
right.
might see those students at lunchtime, maybe.
Maybe.
Uh-huh. And so they were there. I do think that kids who had mental health problems and had behavioral challenges were always there, but they were kept somewhat separate. There was also not as many. There were not as much of an impetus on the school to keep them there. So they might outplace them. They might just not serve them at all. Parents might have kept them at home.
Mm-hmm.
But also, there is some. I don't know that the the statistics on it bear out that it's just that there is some differences. I don't know that it's all just that we diagnose more now and we recognize more, or if there are things in our environment that are creating
Causing.
this more commonly. Yeah. So we do have drug epidemics. We do
Mm-hmm.
have poverty epidemics. We do have people living in high stress environments. We do see a lot more trauma based behavior
Mm-hmm.
than I recall. I'm not enough of an expert in the statistics on that to tell you if it is just that we recognize it more and we see it more because we don't send them away like we used to,
Mm-hmm.
or if it's truly an increase.
Yeah. As a BCBA, are you being called into these settings to work with primarily children with autism, or
Mm.
behavior intervention in general?
So I'm not practicing right now,
In
but,
the past.
and I'm, yeah. And I don't know that my experience is typical for most behavior analysts. So most behavior
Mhm.
analysts now work with children with autism,
Right.
period.
Hmm.
I'm old. And so,
We
and
both,
I live,
we both are.
and I live in a state that it was really slow to build up insurance reimbursement services for autism.
Hmm.
And, those reimbursement rates, when they did get passed, were pretty low. So we had a long time before we were actually attracting a lot of behavior analysts here.
Hmm.
So, and also what was different about me is starting at the end of the age spectrum, like we were talking about before. I started with
Yeah.
adult and worked my way backwards. I fell into behavior analysis from psychology. So that made my situation a little bit different. But as far as what you're asking, mostly when I was consulting in schools, um, it was anybody who had a SPED ruling. And
Okay.
sometimes it was kids who had behavioral issues who didn't have a SPED ruling or diagnosis of any kind yet, but were, they were in the TIRPS process, in the RTI process. So yes, I personally have worked across the mental health spectrum. I think that my training with my LPC, which is licensed professional counselor, so that mental health background in
Yeah.
addition to the behavior analysis background, gave me a little bit more of a skill set for that than most behavior analysts have. They're
Hmm.
not, most behavior analysts are not necessarily trained in that. So they would get their degree and then they would have to work under supervision with someone for whom that was their specialty in order to extend those services beyond autism.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about, now that we've talked about behavior analysis, BCBAs, let's talk about how BCBAs and SLPs work together, because you were talking earlier and you said it's much more sophisticated and we're looking at more of the analysis. We're looking at what's happening surrounding that behavior now, what's causing it. As a speech pathologist in the school setting, typically I'm called in and they say the behavior is occurring because they can't communicate. A lot of nonverbal kids,
Yeah.
limited engagement, low cognitive skills. They can't communicate. But you also said something else. You said, is the environment too taxing? And I think that a lot of times that is overlooked, because in the school, we're looking at, we've got these IEPs that have to be written to a T. We've got to have math goals. We have to have reading goals. We have to have all these things in the IEP to check off all the boxes. And then that kind of overtakes what we're trying to do. So
Yeah.
how can BCBAs and SLPs work together in conjunction? Because the skill sets are very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
The speech pathologist is coming at it from a communication standpoint, and we're just, quite frankly, we're not trained to analyze that behavior and determine the ABCs of what's going on and how to prevent it. So how can BCBAs and SLPs work together in the beginning with kiddos?
My favorite thing to do whenever I get called in for, usually they're calling the behavior analyst or me. I was a consulting behavior analyst. So when I was getting the call for the school district, it was, we want an FBA,
Right.
functional behavior assessment.
Right. And
And
I've been
so,
asked to write FBAs, and I'm like, dude, I don't know how to do that. I mean, I can read it and I can fill out the box, but I don't know what I'm doing. And most speech pathologists are often put in that situation.
it's amazing to me that happens, but that's a legal carve out for schools because, most licensure for behavior analysts is available in almost all states now, and it falls within the scope of a behavior analyst to do that. So anyone who was doing an FBA outside of schools usually or state-run services would be practicing behavior analysis without a license. And so it is interesting to me that in some places they have distilled this down to a set of forms that people fill out that
Yes.
then guide you. It's plug and play.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and sometimes I guess if it's very straightforward, that's good enough. But what you're missing when you do that is what I said earlier: the skill deficits, the really looking at the environment.
Mm-hmm.
When I go in and do an FBA, And as a caveat, I will say this: I live in Mississippi, and I had contracts with specific school districts. They knew what my work was, and they knew what I was going to do, and everything was approved and all of that. There
Right.
are states where, because of teacher unions and such, no one other than a principal can go into a classroom and collect data on a teacher. So what
Oh,
I'm about to
wow.
tell you, I don't want anybody walking out of here saying that you can do that. You have to know what the laws are where you are
In your state.
in
Yeah.
your state, in your area. And not only that, but what the norms are within the culture of that school. You can't come in just, willy-nilly saying, I'm going to sit in your speech session, I'm going to sit in your OT session, I'm going to sit in your classroom, and I'm going to collect data, not on the kid, but you.
Right.
Um, but that's exactly what I find most useful. When I go in, I'm serving the child, yes, and looking for what you call the ABCs of behavior. So, what are the target behaviors that have been sent to me? Then I sit down with the person, whether it's the speech pathologist, whether it's the teacher, whether it's the OT, whoever it is, and I get it from them individually.
Mm-hmm.
Because 9 times out of 10, what bothers the speech person is not the same thing that bothers the teacher, and it's not the same thing that
That
bothers the
bothers the
OT.
OT. Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because we're
yeah.
all working on very different things. The teacher's trying to teach them to read. I'm trying to teach them to communicate. The OT is trying to do fine motor stuff.
Well, yeah, and the OT may be working one-on-one. You may be working with a small group, and the teacher is trying to manage this
Whole
behavior with
class.
a group of 30 kids at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of those environments are different. The behavior are different. The function of the behavior is different. And so I really like to spend a lot of time talking to each individual and the child, if they're able, to tell me what's bothering you in general
Right.
about working together with these folks or in these settings. What do you hate about math class? What makes this child's behavior make the rest of your work sacrificed? So getting that entire picture. And then I do what's called an ecological assessment embedded into the FBA, which is not only am I collecting data on how many times and under what conditions does this child, scream out in class or whatever it is, but things like how often is the teacher walking up and down the aisles? How often
Mm-hmm.
is the speech pathologist speaking in 3 sentence paragraphs, whereas
Right.
this child probably can only follow one or two
One.
sentences at a time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, it's probably less likely to happen with the speech, but maybe with the teacher or maybe with the OT. How many demands per time period are being asked of this child? How many successes are they getting in each of those demands? So we're looking for things that build frustration. We're looking for things that are distracting. If we're just going to talk about speech right now, what else is going on in this environment that distracts the speech person from being able to implement what they're trying to do with this child? And are they accidentally reinforcing the behavior without knowing
Without
it?
even knowing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because again, we're not trained. We
Right.
don't know what we're doing. We're just trying to get through our day and deal with this kid the best way that we can. And that's where the expert BCBA can come in. But I will tell you, in my experience, and I worked in Alabama, when we're told a BCBA, oh, this child has a BCBA, or we have a BCBA coming in to do the FBA or to observe, we don't get someone like you who is taking in the whole picture. It
Mhm.
more times than not, we're getting someone that's coming in and telling us, the teachers, the staff, what we're doing wrong, and I would say 9 times out of 10 that I've worked with a BCBA, I've been told, and I've heard other professionals be told, well, the reason he's doing it is because you did this, this, and this.
Yeah.
And it's not really taking into account, okay, well, that's okay. How can we fix that? But the child's still pinching and scratching and pulling hair and turning desks over. So
Yeah.
now what do we do?
So my current job, I said I'm not practicing anymore. My current job, I work at Central Reach Institute, and Central Reach is an end-to-end software provider for behavior analysts. So
Mm-hmm.
it's the place where they do all their scheduling. It is where they collect their data. It is where they do their assessments. But my side of it, Central Reach Institute, is the professional development arm.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where you come to get your training if you want to become an RBT, or if you are studying for the BCBA exam, we have test prep. And then afterwards, we do CEUs so that they can keep their licenses and their certifications. I will tell you that the field of behavior analysis is aware, and I don't know what your rating is on here, so I'm not going to curse, that we have behaved in a way that has been offensive
Mm-hmm.
to other team members. And throughout history, when you go back and really dig into, I find it kind of fascinating. My English major hasn't gone away, so I still like the story of people.
Yes.
Behavior analysis was coming up with tools that were working much more rapidly than for instructing skills than what we were getting in education and what we were getting even through like psychology, cognitive psychology, that sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
particularly with people who have developmental disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And they could not get traction anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to change the way they do what they do. And the irony is, behavior analysts are supposed to be really good at finding reinforcement and getting people to work for reinforcement.
Right.
But when it didn't work to change what we call rule governed behavior, where people, as they get to be more complex in their behavioral skills, which includes talking to each other,
Mm-hmm.
changing the way we do things, that it's comfortable for us, listening to somebody who has a different viewpoint,
Different
behavior
perspective.
analysts just stopped
Yes.
trying,
They
and
were
just
like,
went to war.
no.
Like, we're going to make you
Yeah.
do it. You're going to see this is better than what you're doing. You're going to know.
Right. And that's been
Mhm.
my experience. And I think it's been the experience of most SLPs.
And it probably has. And people were trained. It was even in the ethics code, in our task list of things that we had to do, that when we saw somebody using a different approach that's not evidence based,
Mm-hmm.
that we're to confront it. Like,
Yes.
ethically, like we could be brought up on ethics code charges if we didn't do that. Now, did the writers of our ethics code mean that to be applied so literally that we meant for us to go in and start wars with everybody? No, of course not. But people get very literal and get very
Mm-hmm.
scared and very passionate about their work.
Mm-hmm.
And we did not, in the early days, and still today, behavior analysts cannot have CEUs for listening to anybody other than another behavior analyst. Everything
Wow.
that we do continuing ed has to come from behavior analysis. Now, let me tell you the good side of this. It's been recognized.
Good.
And so now our continuing education is inclusive of DEI, and that has filtered into how do you talk to people in general.
Right.
And hearing all of this feedback about how to collaborate cross culturally, and cross culturally means other disciplines as well,
Right.
who have really good skills and things that are important to contribute, and how do we collaborate with them. And a lot of what we're designing at CR Institute now is those so-called soft skills trainings. So still has to be taught by a behavior analyst. We still have to link it to behavior analytic concepts, but we can do that because
But
they
we can.
exist. Behavior
Yeah.
analysis. Can I just say this? Behavior
Yes.
analysis is defined as the science of teaching and learning. Does that
Yeah.
surprise you?
No, it doesn't. It
Good.
does not.
And
Okay.
so we just need to use our science to change our own behavior right now, and we're working on it.
Right.
So hopefully you will start encountering some behavior analysts, especially in this next generation, who are coming out more prepared to collaborate, more prepared to listen. And when it comes to that collaboration piece, my favorite thing to do with a speech person is to hear what your goals are, to read what your assessments are, have you explain to me what they mean, because I'm not trained in all of that, in
Right.
terms of what are the limitations of this person's speech.
Right.
Because I think another issue with speech in the past has been behavior analysis also has an intervention for language development,
Mm-hmm.
communication skills that's
Mm-hmm.
function based rather than developmentally based.
Right.
And there's been some friction about that. And while you're
Absolutely.
saying, I got to teach this skill, they need to stop flipping the tables over,
Right.
we're saying, I have to teach them to communicate so they'll stop flipping tables over.
Right. Right. And so then everybody's just like, balls in the air and we're like running around, and it can be very counterproductive.
It can be, yeah.
Very.
But if we can just set aside that and say, all right, we're all trying to get to this point right here. And if I can tell you that the FBA says that this person flips chairs over because they need to say, I want a break, and this person doesn't speak yet, how would
Mm-hmm.
you like to collaborate with me
Right.
when that is happening?
Right. So how do we get there? How do we come up with goals? I know you have mentioned a term called working backwards.
Mm-hmm.
Explain to me what working backwards is. Let's talk about that.
I just
What
made it
age
up.
group do you what age group do you work backwards? Is that something you do with adults, or you start that with little kids?
Oh, I start that with everybody.
Okay.
I mean, I guess the more common way that this gets expressed is begin with the end in mind.
Okay.
And for me, and probably for you, because of where we started, thinking about what happens when this person grows into a full grown adult.
Mm-hmm.
What are the skills that they are going to need? Really thinking about where are they going in this life? What's
Mm-hmm.
going to keep them safe? What's going
Mm-hmm.
to make them be happy in their life? And what's going to make their life structured in a way? I mean, you have to get along with others.
Right.
And no matter what, you're probably going to be sharing space with other people. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not just what do you want? I think in the beginning when we had person-centered planning, a lot of times it was criticized because it was all about, hey, what are your dreams? We're going to make them come true for you. Oh, you want to be a Major League Baseball player? Great.
Mm-hmm.
And we lost a lot of people with that.
Yeah.
But when you take it back and you look at it in a broader way, where is this person going to live? Who are they going to live with? What kind of job are they going to have? And by the way, how many jobs have you had in your life? Do you have to pigeonhole into one and only train for one? Can you switch around?
Right.
Those sort of things. But then looking about things like loneliness, relationships, understanding another person's point of view, these are all very complex skill sets. And
Mm-hmm.
so, whether I'm starting with someone who is a teenager and we're doing that transition planning for the IEP, what are the skills that are going to prevent you from being successful if you want to work at the grocery store? Well, you
Right.
can't read the labels, you can't match the labels, you don't know how to greet people appropriately yet. Whatever those things are,
Yeah.
we're pulling from that. But if we're talking about a 2 or 3 year old, we don't know all that yet. But
Right.
we can look and we can see things like in the developmental checklists, what are they missing? And fill those things in so that they have as many of those lower skills as they possibly can have. Because if they miss those, then it's very hard to go back and recapture that and build upon them later.
Right. And I think that that's what I have seen over the course of my entire 25-year career, is that so many skills are often and frequently skipped over. And they don't
Exactly.
have those basic skills that they need. But also with those little kids, those conversations can sometimes be tough to have with parents.
Mhm.
And not knowing, like you said, we don't know what the outcome is going to be. We can predict, we can guess what the outcome is going to be. We've been doing this a long time, but having those conversations with those parents can often be very, very difficult,
Yeah.
depending on what the situation is. So,
Yeah. It can be. And there's a process. And sometimes the parent isn't ready to move forward yet.
right.
But at the same time, you can still be giving parents some suggestions on skills to develop in their child,
Mm-hmm.
even if they're not ready to hear this is the diagnosis, this is the severity, all of that. They still, most of the time, want to teach their child,
Right.
And
They
so,
want them to learn. They want them to progress. They want to see what can, what are they going to be?
yeah,
I'm a mom, you're a mom, and we all want to know when they're born, what are they going to be when they grow up? And having that diagnosis, whatever it may be. And those skills can sometimes be very difficult. What do you do with a 16-year-old, a teenager that comes in who has missed a lot of those basic skills? And you do have a lot of behaviors that are interfering with learning, communication, daily living, self-help. What do you do with those kids? How do you take that step back and teach those basic skills at that age?
a lot of it depends on what that skill is that's missing and why is it missing. So it's kind of like a tree branch here. There are some skills that are missing that I'm just going to go back and I'm going to teach didactically,
Mm-hmm.
that we would work on in our ABA sessions, or that we would, consult with whoever, the teacher, the parent, to teach them how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also skills that have been missed that the child is going to have to function in the environment without the skill. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's when we look for the accommodations piece.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you have a similar paradigm of that. Like at some point, you guys have to make a decision: is oral
Mm-hmm.
speech never going to emerge?
Right.
And if
Right.
so, then how are we going to accommodate that with augmentative communication, right? And
Yeah.
so it's the same. Um, some of the things that I find most commonly are things like just how to wait, how to say no, how to make basic conversation beyond the greeting, because I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times kids get those greeting goals early on,
Yeah.
and then it never gets any deeper, but they don't actually know how to maintain a conversation past
Right.
hello, how are you? And then they get to where they're saying the same thing over and over
Over and
again,
over. They
and their
perseverate on
conversational
it.
partner leaves. Yeah, the
Yeah.
conversational partner leaves. And so
Yeah.
the social skills aspect of that, or and if that's not going to emerge yet, how do you engage with someone and keep them interested in being with you without it being conversationally based? So finding other activities that you can
Activities.
do with the
Mm-hmm.
person,
Yeah.
to keep that going. Heck, I'm an introvert. I don't want to talk all the time anyway.
Yeah. Now, you know who the introvert in this group is. That is like a joke. Everyone, she is joking. She is definitely not the introvert in our group.
That is so wild to me. If you guys knew Michelle at age 19, and she was the biggest extrovert of all. So
I
it's none of
was.
this makes
I
sense.
was. I got it all out of my system so that now that I'm older, I can kind of stay in my bubble. So, um, you talked about IDEA a little bit earlier.
Mhm.
SLPs who are listening to this podcast, who are working in states all across the country, how can they advocate for that support from a BCBA in their district, in their facility where they're working? What would you tell them when they're approached by a principal, by an administrator? I need for you to complete this FBA. We need to get this in writing. We need you to write the behavior plan, because I've even been asked to write behavior intervention plans. And there's nothing that's more frightening to an SLP than the words FBA, BIP. I mean, they're like 4-letter words that are frightening. They're terrifying. And I've been doing this 25 years. What would you say to the SLP listening to this that's new, or even like me, seasoned? How do you advocate for that? What do you do?
I think a lot of that depends on your relationship with the person who is asking you.
Okay.
So, in time, there have been times when I've been asked to do things that I felt were beyond my scope of competence.
Mm-hmm.
And I just say, I feel like this is beyond my scope of competence.
Right.
But I know somebody who would do a really good job with this. I think it's a lot easier sometimes to advocate for a specific person that you know would be helpful and useful. So I guess the first step would be getting to know the behavior analysts that are in your community,
Mm-hmm.
because there's good ones, there's bad ones, just like there are in all fields. And there's people who are well suited for certain types of work and people who aren't. So just because you're really good behavior analyst working in a clinic doesn't mean you're going to be a really good behavior analyst working in a school.
In the school.
I would love to see some opportunities for all the related service providers to build a network and to
Mm-hmm.
know who's good at what. That's something that we've been doing here. Like, I know a school psychologist who does a fantastic job of writing up those reports so that the speech person and the behaviorist all understand
Mm-hmm.
where the skill deficits are and that sort of thing. So that's my best suggestion, is instead of advocating for a process, advocate for an expert to
Right.
bring onto the team. And then once that starts, usually, in my experience, as long as it goes well, it sells the next time.
Right.
But I know it's hard, and I know that different districts have these policies in place saying what qualifies you to do these things. But
Mm-hmm.
anytime I'm asked to do anything that I don't feel like I'm qualified to do, I'm going to say I don't feel qualified to do it.
Yeah, I'm glad you
I
said
know
that
it's hard.
because I think that's something that took me a little while to learn in my career, is just to say I don't know. Like, if I don't know the answer to something, but also I don't feel comfortable doing that.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
think as a speech pathologist, don't be afraid of your BCBA. Don't be afraid when you hear that someone's coming in, because again, like we talked about earlier, there can often be a negative connotation. But if we build those relationships
Mhm.
and we have that knowledge and we know this person is really good and we have a successful outcome, then it just helps us as we move forward and we have those more challenging behaviors.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
And yeah, I agree with you. I think earlier in my career, I was a lot more likely to get myself into situations I shouldn't have been in,
Hmm.
because I didn't. You either think that you don't have the right to say no, or you think that it makes you look incompetent if you say no.
Right.
And actually, the best way to show competence is to know where your boundaries are and to be secure enough to say, that's not me. I don't have
Yeah.
the training to do that. I
Yeah.
can help you find somebody, but it's not me.
I often say if I could go back to when I first started in my very first job, if I knew then what I know now, wow,
Yeah.
what a different experience. What a different experience. I remember being asked to do things now that I sometimes lay awake at night and go, I can't believe that. And it's one specific situation. I can't believe that they asked me to do that. But it was
Yeah.
appalling. And I think that as SLPs, I think that is the best advice right there, just knowing your boundaries. And when you're asked to do these things, understanding and being knowledgeable in the fact that there are BCBAs out there, that this is their job. That's what they're trained to do, and building that rapport and building that relationship and working together to find that, to write those goals and understanding in the long run, what are those goals? What are the outcomes? And not trying to get pigeonholed and doing just your speech, but working alongside and collaborating with that BCBA, because you guys are smart. You're smart, smart people.
Well, and so are you. And we're going to be kind of cross pushing this episode. And
Hmm.
so for the behavior analysts who are listening, I think that's the takeaway too, is you hear the feedback, which I
Hmm.
know at this point we've made such a big deal out of it that a lot of behavior analysts are tired of hearing. You don't play well in the sandbox. But if it is hard for you to play in the sandbox, if it
And
is
how
hard for
ironic.
you,
Yeah.
right?
How ironic the BCBAs are the ones that are not wanting to share.
I know, right? So don't be that, and reach across the table, find out what these folks are struggling with and how you can help them, because our tools can help everybody for tracking progress, that sort of thing. We can collaborate that way. But yeah, we have to be respectful of each other, and there's all kinds of information. One of the other things that behavior analysts don't get a lot of training in is just developmental sequencing. And
Oh,
you've got your OT and your speech path who are just loaded with that kind of
yeah.
information. So
Yeah. I
it's a
feel like
great
that's
place to
definitely my strength. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you're writing a communication goal for functional communication, of course you want to be collaborating. You want to know, because all we want is for that person to find a way to communicate what that thing is as fast as possible.
Right.
And you're going to be a lot better at teaching us that than we are.
And you're going to be the best at finding out what that thing is. I need for you to tell me what that thing is, then we will figure out a way for them to communicate it, whether it's verbal, whether it's a picture, whether it's an augmentative device, whatever. But that's a great example. We've got to work together because you're finding out what that thing is, and we're going to help you teach that child to communicate that thing. I love it.
And also for generalization purposes, we'll both be teaching the same skill.
Right.
And what could be better than that?
Right. And once we teach that, the ball just keeps rolling and we can teach more and more things.
Exactly.
And, yeah. I love it. What is one piece of advice you would give SLPs?
Ooh.
Hard question. You're a BCBA, brand new speechy, brand new on the block. You've just been called in to consult. You see the look on her face. She's terrified. The kid's turning over tables, and somebody along the way has told her he's behaving this way because he can't communicate.
Yeah.
What is your advice as a seasoned BCBA, PhD, Dr. Hill?
Wow. I mean, I hate to say this because I feel like I'm just repeating. Reach out for help. You've got a kid that's flipping over tables. You've gotten no training in how to treat flipping over tables, right? Do you get that? You guys get like, okay, I didn't think so.
No, we don't. But we're still asked to do an FBA and write the behavior intervention plan because most people, they're going to say that the cause of the behavior is lack of communication. And a lot of times it is, but sometimes it's not.
But that just let's just stop and think about that for a moment. The topography of the behavior, meaning what the behavior looks like, is still beyond the scope of the speech person. If they are turning over a table while you are trying to teach them their speech, what do you call that? Teach them their speech lesson, or is it
there's work on
participate in session? What do you call it?
I don't know. When you're working in speech stuff, I don't know, I guess. When you're doing your speech thing.
Yeah. All I ever heard is it's time for speech. Like, what do you call it?
When you're doing your time for speech. Yes.
Yeah, you shouldn't. And again, we're getting into systems change kinds of things here, but no one should be alone in a room with a kid that is scaring them.
Right.
Or a grown-up. No one should ever be alone in a room with someone they are afraid of, period.
Right. Yeah.
And so if the question has to do with how do you start learning about problem behavior, you already mentioned it. So keeping track of the ABCs of behavior. So he flipped over the table. The behavior analyst, in order to help you if they weren't there, what they need to know is what happened right before he flipped the table and what did you do? And it's not to blame you. It's to analyze what is it that's motivating it.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that because they always ask, what did you do? And what did you do? I'm glad that you clarified that. It's not to blame you and tell you did something wrong. It's to find out and figure it's the big picture. It's the big picture. I'm so glad you said that. So all you speechies out there, when a BCBA asks you, what did you do? It's not to blame you and tell you did something wrong. It's to figure out where do we go from here? Yes.
And so what we're doing is we're looking at the consequences and the most immediate consequences. The more cognitively advanced a person becomes, those consequences might move further down the line that are changing the behavior.
Right.
But usually if someone is at the level of flipping tables, we're looking at immediate consequences.
Right.
So we want to know things like, I presented this demand. He screamed, flipped the table over, and I said, stop, or I removed the task, or all of the above, or
Mm-hmm.
I screamed for help and a lot of people came in the room, you know.
Yeah.
So what happens immediately? And then we're going to be lining up a long list of examples of this behavior and looking at what are the front end of that, or what are the situations where the behavior is likely to occur. And the back end of that is, what is the payoff? What are they getting from this? Is it attention? Are they
Is
getting
it
out of doing
avoidant?
things they don't want to do?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or is it fun? And fun is a function.
Right.
Sometimes
Eddie.
it's a, and sometimes that, we get to looking into, are they getting away from something? Are they getting to something? And it's usually not that clean, but it will paint a picture for us of, they really don't like instructions of this type. They
Right.
really don't like people who are working with them in very close
Face to
proximity.
face. Maybe you have to
Mhm.
sit next to them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe it's
Or
too hard. Maybe you're
maybe it's
asking
too
them to
hard.
do something that's just too hard.
Yeah.
And that would be
Yeah.
really frustrating for me, you know?
Right. And that's another reason that it's good for a behavior analyst to come in and observe, because you're doing other things. It's not
Mhm.
really possible for you to notice everything while
Mhm.
you're actually trying to do your job. And so sometimes the behavior analyst can come in, they can sit back, they can watch the session, and they can say, all right, what I noticed is, as long as they knew that what the right answer was, or how to make the sound, or whatever it is you're doing,
Mhm.
all is cool. But as soon as you start asking something that they're not really sure of, that's when they're flipping out. So maybe we just have to do something small, like change the prompting procedure.
Yeah.
It's not always going to be that we have to put them on some sort of reward system.
Right. I love it.
Mhm.
Gosh. Dr. Hill. Have I ever called you Dr. Hill?
Only when you're being sarcastic. So
I'm not,
thanks.
and I promise I'm not being sarcastic. I am so excited that you were here today. And I
I had
think
a
we
great
talked about a lot of great things.
We
I
did.
hope that the SLPs listening have the takeaway for me is, don't be afraid of your BCBA because
I love it.
they can sometimes be scary, but you can learn a lot. And I think also you hit the nail on the head when you said, know your boundaries. And when you're, as a speech pathologist, when you're asked to do these things that you don't feel comfortable, that I know for a fact we were not trained to do, speak up, set those boundaries and say, I'm not trained to do that, but I will go out and I will find someone who can. And we are going to build those relationships, and we're going to find those BCBAs in our communities that can help support that.
I love it. And
Yes.
I'm really excited that you're now going to come on my podcast, and we're going to talk specifically to behavior analysts about how to
Well,
collaborate from the speech perspective. So I'm looking forward to
yay.
that.
I love it. Well, gosh, thank you so much, Shannon, for joining us. I hope everyone listening has enjoyed today's episode. And like Shannon said, I'm going to be on her podcast very soon. So I hope you guys have enjoyed it, and we'll talk to y'all soon. Bye. Thank you for tuning in to SLP Full Disclosure. You can learn more about this episode and our show on our website at amnhealthcare.com. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend and subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast platform. You can also find show updates and SLP opportunities on our Instagram at AMN Allied. Special thanks to AMN Healthcare for making this show possible. See y'all next time.